Oh, sorry.
Welcome and thank you for being with us tonight, September 21st, for the Berkeley City Council District 6 Candidate Forum. My name is Elisa Mills of the League of Women Voters of Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We do not support or oppose candidates or parties. The advocacy arm of the League may take positions on issues such as ballot measures. However, this forum is presented by the Voter Services and Education arm of the League, which does not take positions or advocate for them. But first, we will start by taking a moment of silence to honor and reflect on one of the giants of our time, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose recent passing has sparked national mourning and means we must work even harder to dismantle institutionalized injustice and fight for equitable opportunity for all. We will now take 1 minute. As we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that the candidates have all agreed to participate under ground rules set for this forum. These ground rules are posted in Eventbrite. Candidates are not permitted to display campaign buttons, t-shirts, signs, Zoom backgrounds, etc. in order to maintain neutrality. We are recording tonight's forum, and the session will be available on our website, lwvbae.org, through votersedge.org/ca, with links on our social media accounts at lwvbae. There are two candidates running for Berkeley City Council member for District 6. They are Susan Wengruff and Richard Elgin. On your ballot, you will be able to choose one candidate out of the two. Now let's go over a few ground rules. Each candidate has 2 minutes for opening remarks. The order was determined by drawing lots. The timekeeper will signal candidates with a green-colored window, which will count down the seconds from 2 minutes to 15 seconds to go when it will turn yellow, and then red when the full 2 minutes is up. As people signed up via Eventbrite, they submitted written questions. If you have additional questions, you may type them in by clicking the Q&A icon. Our volunteers will take the questions and pass them to the moderator. All questions will be screened to avoid duplication and personal attacks. The order of answering the questions will be alternated, and each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question. Again, the timekeeper will signal candidates. There will be no separate rebuttals. However, the candidates may choose to use some or all of their 1 minute to rebut the response given by another candidate. Following the questions, each candidate shall have 1 minute for a closing statement. Now let's begin with our District 6 candidate forum. Each candidate will give an opening statement of 2 minutes, and we'll start with Richard Elgin.
Thank you. We are in unprecedented times. We must demand more from the leaders we elect and hold them accountable. We need to make real progress in our district and our city to resolve these problems. I'm running because District 6 deserves an effective. I bring deep experience to address the district and city's problems. I have a demonstrated history of not just identifying issues, but leading on them, and a broad history of building consensus. I've chaired the Berkeley Planning Commission and Rent Board, as well as serving on other commissions. For nearly 2 decades, I worked as a deputy city attorney, so I have direct knowledge of not just where we need to be, but how to get there. Among the many matters I have experience in are fire and emergency issues, affordable housing, environmental issues, complex legislation, overseeing projects for a city, aiding small business. I'm the only person in this race with this kind of experience. Some of the reasons why I decided to run are that even 30 years after the devastating Berkeley Hills fire with loss of life and major property damage, we still have no plan for dealing with the highly flammable non-native vegetation that spread the last fire. We still do not have an emergency escape plan for people in District 6. We must save Alta Bates. We need to maintain our infrastructure, including our pitted and pothole streets and the dangerous pathways that the city wants us to use as escape routes. We must do more to reduce our carbon footprint. We need to create more affordable housing for our nurses, teachers, working families, students, and homeless. We must protect our vulnerable tenants, small businesses, and artists from displacement. We can reform and reconfigure police while maintaining public safety. I'm using the public financing alternative to fund my campaign, so I will not be taking money from special interests. These are some of the reasons why I offer my energy and experience for more effective and accountable leadership in District 6, and why neighborhood advocates, the people on the ground in District 6 and citywide, are supporting my campaign. And I thank you for this opportunity to be here this evening.
Thank you. And Susan.
Well, good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. It's nice to be here this evening. I'm running for re-election to Berkeley City Council in District 6. I love the city of Berkeley, and I've dedicated the past 30 years to service to this community. I served on the Homeless Commission, the Landmarks Commission, and the Planning Commission from 1990 to 2008. 4 of those years I was chair. And for the past 12 years, I've served as City Council representative for District 6. I bring balance, expertise, empathy, and institutional memory to the council at a time when our recovery from the devastation of the pandemic requires leadership and experience. I hold the city to high standards for transparency, accountability, and information sharing. I bring a divided council to consensus and insist on collaboration rather than competition. For these reasons, I am endorsed by our current mayor, Jesse Elgin, our current vice mayor, Sophie Hahn, and our current council members, Kesawani, Drosty, and Bartlett. I'm also endorsed by State Senator Nancy Skinner, Assemblywoman Buffy Wicks, and Alameda County Supervisor Keith Carson. They've all had an opportunity to work with me and recognize the value that I bring to the work of the Berkeley City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll start with Richard for the first question. What is your position on Proposition 15, which will increase taxes on commercial properties, and why?
I support Prop 15. One of the devastating impacts of Prop 13 on cities was to significantly reduce their budgets and create a lot of fiscal problems for cities. We need to have the resources, and I think Prop 15 is a good alternative for creating more resources for the city and putting the tax burden where it should be, which is on the commercial property owners and commercial properties. I think it's really important that folks vote for this measure and pass the measure. Otherwise, we're faced with, again, more and especially now when we have the devastation for fiscal impacts for cities with COVID, the money is going to be needed to help cities recover and help cities provide the services that we need. So I support Prop 15 and hope people will vote for it.
Thank you. And Susan.
I agree with Richard. I support Prop 15. And just for the viewers' benefit, I want to explain that Prop 15 will change how commercial and industrial properties are taxed, and they will be calculated by using the market value rather than the original purchase price of the property. So this measure, if passed, has the potential to get us lots of needed revenue for all of the programs that we desperately need. So I definitely am in support of it.
Thank you. And for the next question, we'll start with you, Susan. How will you work to address the climate crisis in the city of Berkeley?
That's a great question. About 60% of our emissions are created by transportation, by cars, vehicles. And so we need to get people out of their cars. And one of the most effective ways to get people out of their cars is to build housing near transit. And I have been an advocate for housing on transit corridors and within quarter to a half a mile of transit hubs since I've been on the council. I think that this is the single most effective thing that we can do. The second thing that we can do is encourage for those people who don't have access to public transit, like many of my constituents, for example, because District 6 is very poorly served by public transit, is to increase the electric vehicle infrastructure. Berkeley is lagging behind other cities on its electric vehicle infrastructure, and that's something that I think we need to pay a lot of attention to and put more resources into.
Thank you. And Richard.
Several things. I agree that automobiles constitute the greatest amount of carbons going into our atmosphere, and we need to reduce those as much as possible. District 6 is transit poor, and one of the things we need to do to get people down to be able to use BART, use public transit, is to consider having shuttle buses. For example, Emeryville has shuttle buses going through the downtown. Oakland has shuttle buses, and West Berkeley has shuttle buses. I think shuttle buses getting people from down from our district to BART will help people use BART. I think we need to look at building BRT lines. I would support putting BRT lines, particularly on San Pablo, so it runs all the way from Oakland all the way out to Richmond. I think that's important. I also think we need to raise the standards for new construction. When we build new buildings, we need to make sure that they're either at net zero or LEED platinum standards and not the reduced standards that have been improved in the past.
Okay, thank you. Now, Richard, our next question. Okay. What should be done to prepare District 6 for disasters like the fires that currently threaten the area? Is there support that can be provided to move power lines underground?
Yes, we can move power lines underground, but I think the principal problem we have is twofold. One is the eucalyptus trees that aided in the devastation of the last fire. And are literally like bombs going off when they catch fire, and also create a lot of problems on the ground for the leaves dropping. Those need to be addressed. Those haven't been addressed in the last 30 years. There are no escape plans for people in the hills to escape from any devastating fire. That's critical. I don't know why it hasn't been done over this time. And I think it's great to be able to underground. If we can underground, we should do it. But I think the priority for spending, if we have money to spend through perhaps Measure FF, should be on reducing the fire risk in the first instance, because if you look at underground, it's still years off. I mean, it's been talked about for years, and we still are no closer to getting undergrounding. But meanwhile, nothing's been done in the other areas.
Okay, thank you. And Susan?
Yeah, could you repeat the question, please?
Certainly. What should be done to prepare District 6 for disasters like fires that currently threaten the area? Is there support that can be provided to move power lines underground?
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I have been working for the last 12 years to educate and teach people about how to take care of themselves in the event of a devastating catastrophe like an earthquake or a wildfire. I have held huge forums, filling up large auditoriums, doing panel discussions. We've organized the city to take CERT courses to prepare people for all of this. This is absolutely critical. People need to have the self-confidence and the knowledge to know what to do in the event of a disaster. That's number one. Number two, we do have evacuation plans. There is no way you can have a set plan because you don't know where the threat is coming from. But people understand that the widest streets that are available that are leading off the hill are the streets that should be used for evacuation. It's not a mystery.
Okay. All right. Thank
I have a
you.
lot more to say on that one.
Okay.
As do
So
I.
all right. Okay. For the next question, we will start with Susan. There's some concern from residents about unsafe high-speed bicycling on Wildcat Canyon Road. What can be done to safeguard walkers and hikers?
Okay, well, I'm working on this issue right now. It's not just bicycles, it's also motorcycles and vehicles. And we are working collaboratively with the East Bay Regional Parks because Wildcat Canyon goes through the park. Our police chief and the police chief of East Bay Regional Parks, at my urging, have decided to cooperate and collaborate on a plan to get these people to adhere to speed limits. We're also going to be installing speed limit signage and cautionary curve signage so that people are aware that they need to slow down. It is a dangerous situation, there's no doubt about it. Right now during COVID, people are taking out their frustration by speeding, and it's potentially dangerous, but the police from both jurisdictions are on it.
Okay, thank you. And Richard?
Look, this is not a new problem. I live above Wildcat, a ways above Wildcat, but I've been talking to people about this problem for a long time. And it's not just something that just came up. It's been here, and I don't understand why it hasn't been dealt with a long time ago. Because people have been complaining about it for as long as I've been here practically, and I haven't seen any progress on it. Now, all of a sudden, we may be getting some progress, and I'm glad to see that there is some progress. But I think we need to be proactive about these situations when they come up, because it's been a long time since people have been putting up with the motorcycles running down and up and down Wildcat, with the cars drag racing and the bicyclists going on there. It's been years going on, and now we're finding maybe something will happen with dealing with it, but it's just been too long. It's not a new issue. It's an old issue that's been there for quite some time, and nobody's paid attention to it until now. Maybe better late than never, but I say we need to deal with these issues much more expeditiously.
Okay. And next, we'll start with Richard. What is your stance on Berkeley Ballot Measure FF, the Fire, Emergency Services, and Wildfire Prevention Tax?
I support Measure FF. I think it should have been on the ballot many years ago to provide additional money for firefighting and for emergency preparedness. I think it's important. I hope we can get the 2/3 to adopt it because it is an important measure. The difference that I have, perhaps with the incumbent, is that I think the money should be spent first on dealing with two things. One, dealing with the vegetation that can contribute massively to expanding any wildfires that take place and defeat our ability to curb them at an early stage. And the second thing is there is no emergency planning. If you look at the city's website on emergency planning, they say two things. They show you a picture of the city with the evacuation routes going Marin, Grizzly Peak, Spruce, and so on, the major streets. But the fire department comes and tells you, don't go on those routes because we need to get our vehicles up that way because we can't go around the windy streets. And for escaping on foot, they tell you use the path. The pathways are really dangerous in the best of times, let alone when you're trying to escape.
Okay. And Susan?
I support Measure FF. I participated in the writing of the ballot measure, and I was instrumental in bringing that measure to council. We very much need to upgrade our 911 dispatch system. It's antiquated. We very much need to have more ambulances in Berkeley. The city is responsible for all of the students on campus, and when they reopen, it's unusual right now that they're not here, but we have a lot of people to serve, and with the closing of our debates, our ambulances will be out of service at least a half hour more per run. So this is all very important. The fire mitigation part is essential. It's crucial. We do not have the money for a robust inspection program on private property. Other jurisdictions do. Oakland does, Kensington does, Marin County does. We need to have a robust inspection program where people are actually cited for their violations. And actually, historically, fire department has never cited anybody. They've given warnings, but they've actually never cited anybody for violations. We need to get serious about this because we are at great risk.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I want to encourage the audience to please feel free to put forward additional questions in the Q&A tool there. All right. Okay. So starting with Richard again, what is your stance on Berkeley ballot measure HH, the utility users tax?
I support HH. I think we need to have additional funding in place so we can use that money. Ideally, I believe that's a general tax, so it's not going to be it's not a special tax. So I think it would go into the general fund, but I think that if I were on the council, I would use the money for doing energy improvements, like for example, our vehicle fleet is still gas powered, and the council, including the incumbent, recently voted to put in replace some gas powered meter vehicles with more gas powered vehicles, which locks us into those for another 10 or 15 years. I think we need to replace our vehicles with electric powered vehicles as soon as we can, and also to make energy efficient improvements on city buildings and so on. I think that would be a good use of that money also.
Okay, thank you. And Susan?
I supported putting it on the ballot, but I don't support it. I think that this money is available from other sources. We don't have to go to the taxpayers and tax everybody across the board to fund these programs. We have RICO, we have Renbay, I think. We have a lot of different programs that are available to people who want to make their homes more energy efficient. So I feel like this is kind of punitive to everybody because it's a utility users tax increase. It will affect everybody. And this is not the time, I feel, to be doing this to people.
Okay, thank you. And then Susan, what is your stance on Berkeley ballot measure II, the Police Accountability Charter Amendment?
I'm very much in favor of II. I also worked on drafting the ballot statement on II. This is the result of a lot of work over many years with all the stakeholders at the table and agreeing on the language. And I think it will make our policing more equitable and accountable. So I very much support it.
Okay, thank you. And Richard?
I support it also. I think it's interesting in history. Police accountability has been around for forever. Teddy Roosevelt cut his teeth on a police commission where he was dealing with police accountability. So it's been here. It's just too bad that Berkeley is so behind the curve on this, as many other cities have already adopted police accountability measures similar to this, or maybe even stronger than this, that we're now coming around years later and doing it. I do think it's an important cog in terms of reforming and reconfiguring policing, because it does provide the accountability for those officers who somehow can't manage to conform to the standards of a police officer. So I think I support it. I think it is important, and I hope people will vote for it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And then Richard, what is your stance on Berkeley Ballot Measure NM, the rent stabilization ordinance?
I'm supporting this for a couple of reasons. One is I think it does some, it conforms the rent ordinance to the current state of what we're dealing with in terms of the COVID emergency legislation. The other thing I think is important is that the services that landlords get are currently being provided by the rent program for without payment by those landlords. I think it's important to spread the costs out among those landlords, and that's for ADUs. I also support that for the ADUs because I think if you think about it, if people are putting in new ADUs, those are accessory dwelling units, they are not going to be rent controlled because they're new construction. And new construction is exempt under all the rent control, the statewide rent control schemes we have and local rent control schemes. So they're not going to be controlled. So I think there's very limited circumstances in which there's going to be any more rent control applied to properties, even with ADUs. So for all those reasons, I support it.
Okay, and Susan?
I voted to put it on the ballot because I believe the voters should decide, but I personally am opposed to it. First off, I am very much in support of the construction of ADUs and also the adaptive reuse of parts of your home or your garage to create habitable living units. We had a ballot measure 2 years ago that guaranteed that those units would not come under rent control. Then the rent board came back this year and said, oops, we want them to be under rent control. That created a huge distrust amongst the voters and the populace. I feel there's enough distrust of government going on already. We don't need to add to it. I am in favor of ADUs, and this measure says that if you build a second ADU, or if you convert, for example, part of your house into a second ADU, then they will be rent controlled. And I'm opposed to it for that reason. I also think that paying a fee to the rent board for a single family home that's rented is a power grab, a power and a money grab. The rent board doesn't provide any service to those people.
Okay, thank you. And now, Susan, I'll ask you. How can Berkeley better address the issue of homelessness and affordable housing?
That's the $64,000 question. Actually, $64 million question. We need to build permanent supportive housing. This is the only way that we are going to be able to get on top of the problem. That is a long-term solution. Permanent supportive housing with wraparound services. In the meantime, it takes a long time to get the money together to build that kind of supportive housing. Berkeley Way project just broke that ground a couple of months ago. It took them 10 years to put that package together. In the meantime, we need to find a safe option, and it's been very complicated by COVID because traditional shelters do not work under COVID. So we have rented motels. We've rented 2 motels now. We've purchased 15 trailers. It's just a drop in the bucket, but we're trying everything we can with the resources that we have to house the homeless now to protect them from the spread of COVID.
Thank you. And Richard?
First of all, we do need to build more affordable housing, and we need to put priority on affordable housing. Berkeley has been building a lot of market rate housing, but not as much affordable housing. So first of all, I think that on city or publicly owned sites, such as the BART stations, those should be reserved for affordable housing because we don't have a lot of sites for affordable housing. And we're not going to solve the homelessness crisis ultimately until we build more affordable housing. And affordable housing means a good mix. Affordable housing includes people earning up to, family of 4 earning up to $150,000 a year. So it's still all the way down to almost nothing. So it's still a big mix. The other thing is I agree that we should be using motels and finding more motels to put people in and finding getting traditional services transitional services for them, and also providing services for where they are now to protect the homeless from being out there abandoned on their own. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Richard, will Prop 15, if passed, damage existing businesses in Berkeley and discourage new business development?
Prop 15, by Prop 15 again, you mean the fix to the old Prop 13?
Yes.
Yes, I don't think so. This is, property taxes don't make up the major portion of rents for commercial dwellings. They're a small portion of it. So I don't think the increase is going to affect small businesses greatly. So I think it's more important to have that fix in place so that commercial property owners will pay what regards their fair share of taxes. Remember, this is the way it used to be. We're going back for commercial properties. We're going back to the way it was before the Jarvis tax measure came in. So I don't see this as being a major impact on small businesses. And I would also support small businesses being able to buy the places where they're currently operating their businesses. If we could have some kind of program that would enable them to and also have some form of rent control on it, that would be a help also.
Okay, and Susan?
Well, I'm going to be quite honest. I have not done an in-depth analysis of Prop 15 and what the unintended consequences of it might be. So I really don't know the answer to that. I hear from a question that there might be some concern about that. So I am going to look into it. On the face of it, I would say no, but I'm not sure, frankly.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, Susan, do you support the November measure that pays the mayor and council full-time so the mayor would receive $107,000 per year, and why?
I do support it. I support it because we are working full-time. I have been working 24/7, frankly, and I am compensated at about $33,000 a year, which puts me at very, very, very low income. I don't have a pension to draw on, and I don't get a pension for doing this job. Okay, so the least we could do is be fairly compensated. We passed a minimum wage law for other workers, and yet somehow we don't qualify for that same fairness. So I do, and the mayor works, his responsibilities are enormous, and $107,000 a year is the least we can do. It's not that much out of our budget. I realize it's coming at a very bad time when people are hurting, and I'm very sympathetic to that. I wish we didn't have to do it right this minute, but this was our opportunity.
Okay, and Richard?
Admittedly, I had mixed feelings about it because of the timing on this. But I think if we're going to have an honest, open government, we need to be able to enable people who have lesser incomes, who don't have other income to support them, to be able to run for and serve in this office. And I think people who can't afford to serve without getting that money can either not take it, or, as I think one council member has done, basically hired another staff person in the office to do it. So I think if we have that alternative for doing that, that would be a help also. But I think it's really important that this job has evolved into something that used to be a much smaller job, but now with everything, with all the issues we have and with the constituent work that needs to be done, it really is a full-time job and should ultimately be compensated that way, particularly for those people who cannot afford to do it virtually on a volunteer basis, which is pretty much what it is now.
Okay, thank you. And Richard,
Yeah.
What specifically have you done to protect our community to reduce wildfire risk?
Well, I've had a lot of experience with this. I've worked in Oakland dealing with fire risk and reducing fire risk. And I started this after I was the attorney on the scene at the Ghost Ship fire and seeing the devastation and the lives lost in the Ghost Ship fire. And then I worked with the with the fire department directly on reducing fire risk in the hills, where we did go out and we cleared off vacant lots. Where we cited people for not clearing them off, and we said, if you don't do it, we will, and it will cost you a whole lot more if we come in and do it, and we will put a lien on your property. And we did that. We also developed escape plans for folks to get out of buildings and out of areas to be able to escape fires. And I dealt with the plans on doing that and how to do it. So I've had a lot of experience in dealing with directly with fire issues and with the fire department and how to address these issues. And I think I'm in a good position to help Berkeley through this wildfire season and now future wildfire seasons.
Thank you. And Susan?
Yeah, I've been working on this issue intensely for at least the last 6 years. And now I am working regionally because, everybody knows that wildfire does not know boundaries. And what we learned in the 91 fire was that there was very little communication between Oakland and Berkeley. In fact, our hydrant hoses were not even compatible with Oakland's fire hydrants. So I'm working regionally. I'm working with the city of Oakland. I'm working with Kensington, which is an unincorporated area of Contra Costa County. We are talking about forming a JPA specifically for fire prevention. We're involving the East Bay Regional Parks, the Disrepair, the university, the lab, the Berkeley lab, and all working together, sharing resources, sharing knowledge, and sharing implementation strategies. I'd just like to rebut something that Richard said earlier about the council salaries, if that's okay.
Well, I'm sorry, but you've already used up your 1 minute. But
okay.
at the next 1 minute, you certainly may.
Okay. I'm not seeing a timer, by the way. I'm not seeing a.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I see it. I don't know where.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
That's okay. We don't have to bother. I tend to be quite concise, so we don't.
Okay.
Take up time.
Okay. Well, I will ask this question, but if you want to spend some of that time rebutting, you may. So, homeless campers are primarily settled in South and West Berkeley. Is there a reason that area is bearing the burden, perhaps unfairly? What is your reaction to that complaint?
Well, one of the reasons why they are there is because they are not on city property. They are camping on Caltrans property down by the freeway, and they were camping on BART property in South Berkeley. They have figured out very cleverly where to go where the city doesn't have full jurisdiction. So that, I think, is one of the reasons why they're there. The other reason is because they can access services and food in those locations. Up in the hills, getting up there is a real challenge. We do have several parks where we have many homeless people living, but they're not in the density that we're seeing in other places. So that's why I think we're seeing it in that way. That was the question. It's just a question of geography, frankly.
Thank you. And Richard?
Yeah, I think it is unfortunate that the homeless have collected around those areas. And I've actually dealt with some of these issues with Caltrans and other public entities about how to deal with some of these things. For example, cleaning up the messes around where you've seen all the trash around some of the freeways and so on. We actually threatened to sue Caltrans over the responsibility to clean these areas up and make it safer for people. And so we entered into an MOU with Caltrans to deal with some of these things. So we forced Caltrans to deal with their responsibilities on this. But also I think we need to find more safe spaces for people away from freeways, because those are dangerous areas to be in the first place. And so I think if we can find safer spaces for people to move into other areas of the city or other places around the city, and get them out of those areas in the first place, I think that's what we really need to work on.
Okay, thank you. And now, Richard, some of Berkeley's streets and infrastructure are in great disrepair. What is your position on repairs and maintenance?
I agree. I think there are a lot of problems. You know, one of the things I've been talking about with folks is, for example, the streets up in District 6, especially those streets where people may have to evacuate on. A lot of them are pitted, have potholes, and if you can imagine people having to evacuate on foot, perhaps in the dark or it's smoky and they're panicking in pitted and potholed streets that are serious tripping hazards. If for no other reason, those things need to be addressed. The other problem is the pathways up here. One of the city's escape plans is they tell you buy the pathways map and use the pathways. Some of those are steep, they're deteriorated, they have no handrails, they're difficult for people, able-bodied people to do in normal times, let alone seniors or people taking children and pets and packs along, potentially in a panic mode. And plus, you can't even see where they are. Why aren't those fixed up? Why has this taken so long to get people on this people's radar screen to deal with these things?
Okay, and Susan?
Yeah, well, our streets are in terrible condition. And one of the problems, especially with streets in District 6, is that the criteria that have been established for which streets get paved always work against the smaller residential streets. And I think that we have to change our criteria. So the first step is to change the criteria. The second, one of the criteria is usage. So for example, a street like University Avenue or San Pablo Avenue or Shattuck Avenue obviously is going to get much more use than a street like Poppy Lane or Hilldale Avenue or Keeler. So it always goes to the bottom of the list. I don't think that's fair. I think that we have to establish a better way of determining which streets get paved. Obviously, we have limited resources. We can't pave every street all the time, but we do need to have an equitable allocation of resources. Now, do I have time left to rebut what Richard said a while back? No.
Sorry.
I've got plenty to rebut too, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Susan, what is your stance on the fire-prone eucalyptus trees in the hills, many of which lie on private property or emergency routes?
Well, I would love to see them gone. The question is, how do we pay for it? Removing a tall eucalyptus tree can cost as much as $60,000. I just finished a project where I worked really hard for years with neighbors to get a eucalyptus tree removed on Lower Halcon Path so we can improve that path. And it cost about $32,000 to remove that tree. So it's a resource issue. I would love to have people remove eucalyptus trees on their private property, but very few people have that amount of cash. The important thing about eucalyptus is to keep the understory clean and make sure, because it's that understory that is so flammable and will create a very bad situation in the event of a conflagration. So the city has removed some of the ukes. We removed a uke, actually about 3 ukes at Wildcat Canyon at the interface with the park, just east of Grizzly. We also removed some ukes at Summit at the interface with Tilden Park. So we are slowly removing ukes, but as I said, it's a resource issue.
Thank you. And Richard?
There are groves of eucalyptus trees in District 6 in various areas. And I think it needs to be addressed. That's why I think if that passes, and I was on the council, I would try and orient resources towards removing the eucalyptus trees first, so we can remove the fire danger. Frankly, it's 30 years after the fire, and we've still got eucalyptus trees up here. And it's not just the understory; it's that when they burn, they literally explode. The city has shown has its own video of this showing a eucalyptus tree exploding. I think we can provide resources to people to help lot all at once. You're going to cut significantly down on the cost of removal. Removing one tree at a time gets more expensive. If you remove a number of trees at a time under the same contract, you reduce the cost significantly. And I think we can help people remove those trees, because I think it's important to all of us to provide that kind of fire safety for the community.
Okay, thank you very much. So, since you both had an interest in getting a little more time to do a rebuttal, I would suggest perhaps then, as part of your closing statements, we might give you then 2 minutes to do the closing statements and be able to include some rebuttal in that time. But I'm going to ask this one last question here. And since we ended with you, Richard, on that last one, I guess I will ask you first. Are police officer disciplinary records available for citizens' review? And if not, what is your view about that?
Hey, I think my understanding is that disciplinary records are available for limited review because of state law provisions regarding that. I haven't dealt with it specifically as in my role as a deputy city attorney, but I think that people have to file petition motions and so on to get access to, those are special court motions to get access to those records. I think that the commission should have access to those records, and they can make a determination as to whether or not those records are sufficient that they should be made public to people. I think that's a procedure we might be able to use to satisfy the privacy concerns, but recognizing that also the police officers have a special place in terms of our city, that we need to make sure that police officers are adhering to policies, not violating policies. And so disciplinary records are a part of showing which officers are conforming and which officers are not conforming. So I would argue for more public access if we can get that.
Okay, and Susan.
Yeah, I think that this is a complex legal issue, and it's also a personnel issue, and we have laws protecting privacy regarding this. But this measure that we have just put on the ballot, we will have an independent accountability auditor who will be monitoring all of this. And so I think that the public will have access to a lot more information moving forward if this measure passes. Do I think people should have access to that? Yes, I do, within the limits of the law and within the limits of the personnel regulations that protect privacy. So that's my answer.
Okay, thank you very much. So one last question before I give a final statement and you give your final statements. So Susan, what is your stance on the Berkeley ballot measure GG, the tax on transportation network company trips?
I support it. I'm a little concerned about the impacts it's going to have on senior citizens, especially in my district, in District 6, because we've been threatened with no buses. AC Transit has threatened to stop service on the 65 and the 67 and the 7, and these are the transit lines that seniors in particular use. So it is going to hit them. They're going to have to pay, and I think that that's very unfortunate. I'm sorry about that, and I think we should have something in there for seniors and disabled people that allows them not to pay that extra fee.
Thank you. And Richard?
I support it also. I agree that there can be unintended impacts from it, but also if you think about the system beforehand where there were taxis in place, you know, the city took a good franchise fee from taxis, and people had to pay that. So I think this is a small fee that to pay for the service and to pay for the impacts on our roads and on our infrastructure caused by the additional transportation runs. And I think that one way of dealing with some of these is to provide for some kind of, for people who are in special categories of low income, seniors, disabled, and so on, of potentially rebating or giving them a special card, which allows them to ride without paying the tax if need be. So I think there's some things we might be able to do along those lines to correct the situation for those who can ill afford the additional cost.
Okay. Thank you very much. So before the candidates give their closing statements, I have a few remarks on behalf of the LWVBAE. Thank you to the candidates for running for office and for your participation this evening. I also want to thank the audience for engaging in our democracy. For further information about upcoming forums, the candidates, pros and cons, and positions on ballot measures, please visit the League's website, lwvbae.org or votersedge.org/ca. We invite you to join the League to help us engage voters and defend democracy. We do so much more than voter registration and education. Visit our website and social media accounts at LWVBAE. The deadline to register to vote is October 19th this year. You can register to vote online at the Secretary of State's website, sos.ca.gov. Remember to vote by mail or at the polls by Tuesday, November 3rd. This year, we are encouraging voters to vote as early as possible. Please see our website for more information about voting in this election. Now, the candidates will make closing statements. We will reverse the order that we began with, and each candidate will give a closing statement for a total of 2 minutes, and therefore we will begin with Susan.
Thank you. I want to comment on something that Richard said earlier about council members who are affluent enough not to take the salary, using the salary to hire additional aides. This creates a very inequitable situation. And actually, it means that that council person can deliver twice as many services to his or her district as the person who is doing this and doesn't have additional income. In other words, if you hire 2 aides, then you have twice as many resources to serve your constituency as the person who can only afford 1 aide. I think that is a terrible idea, and I don't think it should be allowed. In terms of my closing, let me say that public health, safety, wildfire prevention, environmental leadership, and fiscal responsibility, reimagining equitable policing, affordable housing, and the delivery of efficient core services are my priorities. I have a substantial record of accomplishments working collaboratively and building consensus, but there is always more to do. And it's always easy for a challenger to say, you haven't done enough. I gained unanimous support to make wildfire safety a top priority, and for a ballot measure to fund wildfire prevention, emergency medical response, and evacuation planning. And I secured more than $1 million for fire fuel reduction. I continue to champion undergrounding of utility wires and keeping Alta Bates Hospital in Berkeley. My leadership to establish a reserve fund and focus on fiscal responsibility ensured a balanced budget despite a $40 million deficit. Join the Sierra Club, the California Democratic Party, East Bay Young Dems, Stonewall Democratic Club, Berkeley Democratic Club, Alameda County Building Trades, in their endorsement of me. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. And Richard.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. This has been one of the more interesting exchanges we've had during this campaign season, with lots of questions and lots of opportunities to respond to them. So I really appreciate the time that you've given us. Look, so let me just respond to what she said. I find it astounding to think that, wow, you could provide more constituent services to your district, and that's a problem. Somehow I don't think that's a problem. And I think if we can do that, that's a way to go.
What's a problem is the inequity.
Please.
I mean, Councilmember Hahn currently does that, is my understanding. So I thought it was an interesting idea to propose. I'm not saying that I would do it, but I think it's an interesting idea. Well, let me say, look, I'm really concerned about the fire situation, as I've said over and over again during this period of time. It's been 30 years since the last fire, and here we still don't haven't dealt with the problems that we currently have in the district for fire and emergency preparedness. It's still lacking, and we see this every day as people get more and more concerned. We see the red flag days continuously coming, and people worried about where they're going to go, how they're going to get out, what's going to happen, and yet we don't have plans for people to get out, and I think that's a travesty at this point, 30 years after the original fire. Yes, undergrounding is a great thing to do, but look, we've been there for 12 years, and we still don't have any undergrounding in place. In Oakland, when the newly elected council members last time got an area undergrounded in her first year. San Diego has a priority for undergrounding because it's a wildfire area. Why doesn't Berkeley have that? We could probably lobby for that and get that because of the situation. I think there's more to be done here, and I would like to be the person to do it. I joined council members Harrison and Bartlett, former Assemblymember Sandre Swanson, the Alameda Labor Council, the Wellstone Democratic Club, and Oakland Mayor Libby Schaff, who I've worked with a lot over the years. All endorse me for this position, all know what I can do. And I thank you very much for the time that you've given us.
Thank you both. And let me just say, even though you can't directly experience this, but that I would like the audience to join me in a round of applause for our two candidates. And I want to thank everyone. Thank you all for attending, and good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.